Hi guys, welcome back. Face to Face, reading Joan of Arc. Such a good story, a true story about a young girl who saved the country of England. So good. Here we go. Chapter 8, Prison. Joan was now in the hands of the Duke of Burgundy. The English wanted to put her on trial, but they were not the only ones who wanted Joan of Arc. Many important Frenchmen in the church didn't like her because she talked to saints and angels without any help or permission from them. The Catholic Church was willing to pay 6,000 francs for Joan, but the English king offered 10,000 for her capture. Only a king would be worth that big a ransom. One person offered no money, King Charles VII, the very man she had been working so hard to defend. Wow. While her enemies haggled over price, Joan was kept in a castle tower. She was afraid of what the English would do to her. She tried to escape by jumping out of a window 60 to 80 feet above the ground. Although she didn't get seriously hurt, she was found and returned to the tower. 60 to 80 foot tall. That's like a 7-story building. That is so crazy. On November 21st, 1430, the Duke sold Joan for 10,000 francs to the English king. I wonder how much that would be today. The church planned to hold a special trial called an Inquisition at the University of Paris to punish Joan for the crime of saying she had been sent by God. Joan's trial would be held at Rouen, a French town that the English controlled. The English King of France, Henry VI, was living there at the time, and he was only 9 years old. The trial would be conducted by Pierre Cauchon, a French bishop who was loyal to the English. Her own king, Charles VII, still did nothing to help her. Even though she served him so well, she got little in return, but Joan never stopped being loyal to the king. The bishop made up a list of all of Joan's crimes against the church, everything from sorcery or witchcraft to wearing men's clothes. Back then, you would get in trouble for wearing men's clothes. Oh, let's see here. On December 23rd, Joan was thrown into the prison in Rouen to await her trial. She had 5 guards, 3 of whom stayed inside her cell with her. Her ankles were put in shackles, and she was chained to her bed. She might have been put into chains because people thought she had the power to fly away. Since Joan was being tried for religious reasons, the law said she ought to be held in a church prison with nuns as her guards. Instead, she was being held in a tower surrounded by male guards and soldiers who treated her roughly. Joan's enemies, hoping to get evidence against her, even sent a man dressed as a priest to talk to her. A faithful Catholic, Joan was grateful to be able to speak about her sins. But Joan was not a witch. She had not broken the law, so the spy had nothing to report. On February 21st at 8 in the morning, Joan of Arc entered the royal chapel in Rouen Castle. She was 19. The trial for her life was about to begin. Bishop Cauchon was an important man in the church who had been to law school. Joan was just a poor farm girl. She couldn't read or write except her own name. She had never studied God or religion, and she didn't even have her own lawyer to represent her. Cauchon didn't think Joan stood a chance against his inquisition. He offered to let Joan choose someone in the court to defend her, but only her enemies were present. Ugh. Once Joan was facing him, the bishop discovered this peasant girl was a lot tougher than he had counted on. Even though she'd spent months in prison, she was still strong. She still believed in her saints and in all the things that she had done for Charles VII. The lead prosecutor, the man who would try to prove that Joan was a witch, yelled at Joan in the court and called her names. He tried to forbid her from praying. The trial lasted from February 21st to May 23rd. 3 months. The church did everything it could to prove that she was working with the devil. They brought up local customs in Domremy like the fairy tree and tried to prove Joan believed in magic. One of Joan's worst crimes, as far as they were concerned, was that she dressed in men's clothing. They tried to convince her to put on a dress, but Joan felt safer dressed as a boy, surrounded by the male guards. She explained that she would not change into women's clothing until the saints told her to. The most dangerous questions for Joan were the ones about her faith. Bishop Cauchon hoped to trick her. It's so evil. He wanted her to say something that made it seem like she thought she was better than God. He wanted to prove that she was lying. She was asked about the voices she heard and the visions she saw. What did the saints and the angels look like? Did they have hair? Were they wearing clothes? What language did they speak? Joan answered their questions directly. Sometimes she even made them seem silly. When asked if the archangel Michael was naked, Joan said, "Do you think that God can't find him clothes?" Sometimes Joan flat out refused to answer because she said the saints and therefore God didn't allow it. Koshan was furious at this young girl telling him that there were things that were none of his business. Once he ordered Joan to recite the Lord's Prayer. This was a test to see if she was a witch. He thought a witch would not be able to recite such holy words. One day, her questioners, agents of the church, asked Joan, did she know if she was in the grace of God? This was a tricky question. They were asking Joan if she knew if God was pleased with her and whether she would go to heaven. Both answers, yes or no, would be wrong. If she answered yes, Joan would be claiming to know things that only God could know, and that would show too much pride. If she said no, she would be admitting to being bad. Joan gave an answer that avoided both traps. She said, if I am not, may God place me there. If I am, may God so keep me. Without a legal degree, Joan probably didn't know this was a trick question, but her simple, honest faith led her to an answer that stumped the judges. This reminds me so much of Jesus. The religious people tried to trick him over and over and over again. And the religious people are the ones that ended up murdering Jesus. This sounds just so much like it. As brave and strong as Joan was, the months of the trial took a toll on her. On April 16th, Joan got very sick. The prosecutor went to see her in her cell and told her that her illness was her own fault. Eventually, Joan was well enough to go back for the next part of the trial called the admonitions. The church agents were going to pressure her to confess that she had been lying about talking to God. On May 9th, Joan was taken to the Great Tower of Rouen, where she was shown all the torture tools they would use if she didn't confess. Oh my goodness. Joan was very afraid, but she did not give in. She felt that she had done nothing wrong. She had nothing to confess. A couple days later, a very high-ranking Englishman left a dinner party with a few of his friends and stopped by her tower to make fun of her. Joan shouted back at them that the English would never take France. For all of her suffering, Joan was still holding strong, but her fate was in the hands of her judges, and when it came time to deliver a verdict, they found her guilty. Here is a little side note about medieval torture. Those who would not admit to their crimes during Inquisition were often tortured. Some of the most common and horrible forms of torture included dunking. In this popular test for witches, people were thrown into water. If they floated, they were witches. If they drowned, they were innocent, but also dead. Freezing. Victims would be stripped and freezing water was poured on them in the wintertime. Burning. Victims were either set on fire and killed or slowly burned until they confessed. Oh my goodness. Chapter 10. And this is, I think, the last chapter of our true story, Who was Joan of Arc. On May 24th, 1431, Joan was led to a cemetery where 2 wooden platforms had been built. Surrounded by Bishop Koshan and his agents and crowds of English onlookers, she was told she was guilty of being a heretic, a liar, and a witch. They said that King Charles VII was also a heretic for believing in her. Joan told them not to say anything against her king, which made them furious. Here's a picture. She was up in front of the whole town. The Inquisition judges asked her if she was ready to admit that she had been wrong. Only by doing that would she save herself from being burned alive. Do you want to be burned alive? The judges asked. The crowd pressed forward, yelling, hurry up, when she didn't answer. Ugh. At that moment, and for the first time, Joan lost her nerve. Faced with a horrible death, she signed a note promising to stop wearing men's clothes, to never fight in a war again, and to say the voices she heard were all a lie. Then Bishop Koshan announced she would be imprisoned for life. He had her head shaved as punishment, and Joan hoped that now she would finally be put in a church with nuns But Koshan sent her right back to the tower, this time wearing a dress. It's heartbreaking. Joan quickly regained her courage. 3 days later, she was back in men's clothes, perhaps because her guards themselves had stolen her dress to get her in trouble. Joan told Koshan that the saints said she had done a terrible thing. Joan told Koshan the saints said she'd done a terrible thing by signing the false confession. Yes, she took it all back. And in so doing, she condemned herself to death. She was only 19. On May 30th at dawn, 3 doctors came to Joan's cell to tell her she would soon be burned to death. I would rather be beheaded 7 times than burned. When Koshan himself appeared at her cell to walk her outside, Joan let him know she blamed him for her death. Bishop, I die through you, she said. Joan was dressed in a long black dress. She was led to a wooden cart. A pointed cap was put on her head. A sign on the hat described the crimes they believed she committed. English soldiers followed the cart through the streets to the platform where she would be burned. When Joan got on the platform, she fell to her knees to pray. She asked for forgiveness of God and said she forgave everyone. She asked people in the crowd to pray for her. Many of them burst into tears, even some of the men who had condemned her. Joan asked for a cross. She was given 2 sticks to make her own. She kissed her cross and held it to her chest. Not all of the English were moved by the scene. Do you mean to have us dine here? One called out. He was saying, hurry up, we don't want to be here until dinner time. Joan was tied to a wooden stake, and the bonfire was lit from the bottom. Someone in the crowd held up a cross for Joan to look at. She was soon hidden by the flames, but she could be heard calling, Jesus, Jesus. One onlooker swore that when she died, a white dove flew out of her chest and up to heaven. Once the fire was out, her ashes were thrown into the Seine River. One of the English cried out, "We've burned a saint." He turned out to be right. 22 years later, in 1453, the English were driven out of France, just as Joan had predicted. Charles VII finally came to her defense and reopened her case. In 1456, the church reversed its decision and declared Joan innocent. The news was read out on the very spot where she had been burned. The notes of her original trial were torn up. Over the following centuries, Joan's fame grew. People all over the world heard her story and came to love her, even in England. But nowhere was she loved more than in France. People began to talk of miracles that happened when they prayed to Joan. In 1920, she was declared a saint by the Catholic Church. Today, she is the patron saint of France. That means she is the spiritual guardian of the country. Wow. Every year on May 8th, the city of Orleans still celebrates Joan's victory over the English. She lived for only 19 years, but in those years, she showed more strength, courage, and faith than most. With no training or experience, she stood up to the enemy soldiers, kings, and the powerful inquisition of a trial that had already been decided against her. Yet her last words were to forgive everyone who had hurt her. She became one of the most beloved saints and a hero to even those who did not share her religion or her nationality. She was proof that the poorest of peasant girls could be the richest in faith and could save an entire country. That is one amazing story. You guys, I love these books. Who was Joan of Arc? What an amazing story. It so replicates the life of Jesus. He cried out when they were killing him, "Lord, forgive them, for they do not know." And Joan didn't know that because she couldn't read. And she did the exact same thing before they killed her. She said, "Lord, I forgive them." It's just amazing. Okay, so that was a really good one. Who was Joan of Arc? You guys post your favorite Who Was books, and I would love to read them for everybody to listen to. I really hope you like this book series. Come back next time to see what we start tomorrow, and I'm really excited for you guys. I think you're really gonna like it. Make sure to like this video and subscribe. Share it if you want to. A lot of kids don't have books. And so that's why I started this, so that people who don't read, can't read, don't have books, they can listen to these on YouTube. So I really hope you enjoyed this, and make sure to post your favorite books below in the comments, and hopefully I will get to be able to read them for you. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.